What's up, dudes and dudettes? Welcome back to Just a Dude podcast, where we talk about real life, real struggles, and real comebacks. Today, I've got a guest who's lived a story so wild it sounds like a movie script, except it's 100% true. Imagine this: arrested by the FBI, lost everything to a meth addiction, then years later, the same FBI director hands you an award for helping your community. That's Ed Kressy's life. Ed, welcome to the show, man. Anything you want the audience to know about yourself and your background?
Yeah, hey Nathan, thanks to you and your audience for the chance to be here. I am a person who was given many opportunities in my life. My childhood was idyllic in many respects. I'm very fortunate that my parents instilled in me a love of reading from a very early age. What happened was as I got a little bit older, early teenage years, even in the years before that, I didn't fit in with the other kids. I was very uncoordinated, couldn't compete in gym class or on the athletic fields. I was very sensitive. I would cry easily in school or on the bus rides. I don't know about you, Nathan, but where I went to junior high, reading, crying, being uncoordinated, that's not going to get you elected class president, right?
Yeah, exactly. Especially during our time frames, right? They weren't. I think children were not as, I don't want to say sensitive, but as understanding as they may be today.
I've certainly felt that way. I felt ostracized. I experienced bullying. At age 14, I found it. Drinking, man.
Yeah.
Drinking.
Yep.
It wasn't even so much the feelings of being intoxicated. Drinking gave me the feeling that I belonged. Drinking gave me the sense of confidence. Same story you hear over
Yeah.
and over. The other kids were laughing with me and not at me. I found friends to make. I found confidence to ask girls on dates. I learned how to lift weights. And of course, lifting weights isn't connected to drinking, except in my life, I formed these strong associations because all of these things started happening around the same time in my life. I made these very strong associations between feelings of intoxication, feelings of belonging, confidence, acceptance. And that's what it was all about for me, just feeling like I belonged. I hated myself deep down inside for much of my adult life. Deep down inside, I was always that cowardly kid, afraid to stand up for himself on the playground or in the high school hallways. Drinking gave me these feelings of confidence. The opportunities kept rolling my way. I got the chance to leave my hometown, and my hometown is beautiful. I live there now. I'm actually in my childhood bedroom right now. So I
Nice.
from this beautiful town, wonderful people here in central Massachusetts. When I was 16 years old, I wanted none of that. All the consequences of drinking started early for me,
Hmm.
relatively early. Getting pulled over by the cops, driving ridiculous rates of speed on the country roads, getting busted drinking in the softball field after dark, caught vandalizing school property, screaming matches with my parents at the dinner table, smoking cigarettes out behind the barn.
Yeah.
Consequences set in. All of it and more, I blamed on my hometown. I didn't blame myself, or I didn't take responsibility
Right.
myself. I blamed it on the people. I blamed it on the town. None of that was true. The people were wonderful and still are wonderful. The town is 18 years old. I moved to San Francisco, got the opportunity to go to college early because of my love of reading. I had done well on the standardized tests, the PSATs,
Hmm.
got to go to college a year early. Drinking,
Nice.
yeah,
Yeah, of course. But yeah, and college is not the best place if you're already into drinking, right? Because it's only going to get worse.
that's a good way to put it. Yeah, especially the way I did college. I met some incredible people. One of my closest friends to this day, my college roommate. Remarkable experiences. Yeah, I graduated in college. I graduated from binge drinking, blackout drinking,
Yeah. Right.
to exactly to heavy marijuana, heavy cocaine, ecstasy, psychedelics. I dabbled in a little bit of heroin until the final, and years go by. I actually do graduate college in the literal sense. I found methamphetamine for the final devastating 11 years of my addiction. I was addicted to methamphetamine. Along the way, more great opportunities. I worked for Stanford University briefly. Stanford, Stanford has this very unfair rule. They're very unfair at Stanford. Stanford University, if you work there, will not let you stay home smoking meth and not show up to work. I mean, draconian, man.
Look at that bias there. I'm telling you.
Yeah, yeah. So my career at Stanford didn't last very long, but I did have a relatively long career at a place called Genentech, a very successful biotech company. Treated me incredibly well. I owned a home. I had relationships, friends, family. Rode a beautiful motorcycle. I had all the things. People and the things.
Yeah, kind of living the American dream, right? I mean, for the as far as the stuff that you had.
Exactly. On the outside, living the American dream. On the inside, very dissatisfied, very dissatisfied. And again, it was the self hatred because I would do these shameful things. I would masturbate in the bathrooms at Genentech because I had these compulsive addictions. I lied, I cheated, I showed up. I didn't show up to work, every other Friday, probably more than every other Friday, partying the night before, being at work high, these, and much more. But I knew the real me. I knew who I was. I had this very negative self perception.
Mhm.
And I figured, not at a conscious level, but I figured if you treated me poorly, I would resent you, right?
Mhm.
However, if you treated me well, I would almost resent you even more. I knew
Yeah.
the real me, and I figured, and again, not consciously, but what was going on was I figured, well, you must know the real me too. You must know the compulsive, lying,
Mhm.
addicted. You must know so if you're treating me well, you must either be stupid
Right.
or out
Right.
to get me. Because how could you like a person like me? So all these negative feelings, and many of them I projected onto the world around me, all the negative feelings I could tamp down under this avalanche of booze and drugs. Well, it worked. The insidious thing I found about drug addiction is that drugs are not our problem. Drugs were never my problem. I
Yeah.
never had a problem with drugs. Drugs were
They're
my
your solution. Yep, exactly. Right.
yeah, beautiful.
Because you're masking something else with that drug to feel, whether it's to feel different, like you said, to fit in. But then at some point, because you started with alcohol, at some point the alcohol didn't work the way you wanted it to, right? Which is why you then moved on to the marijuana. And then the marijuana wasn't working the way you wanted it to, or to help you, to your perceived notion of who you should be. And then so you just kept moving on to harder and harder stuff, right?
Yes. Yeah, that's a very good way to put it. The the uh, the solution that drugs and alcohol represented for me, insidious thing is they do work. For me, they worked 20, well, not 20, 15 years, drugs and alcohol worked as a solution. And drugs and alcohol fail as a solution. They often fail catastrophically. That's what happened for me. The When I started smoking meth, when I moved from snorting meth to smoking it, what happened? I tried to create this facade, and a lot of people who struggle do this. You hear the story a lot. A person, one can make the argument, a person who does things like is a kickboxer. Say, take
Mhm.
a professional, not professional, an amateur kickboxer, trains kickboxing all the time. And that same person works at a Fortune 500 company like this biotech firm, Genentech, I mentioned. And that person has these relationships and participates in the family. A person like that cannot be addicted to drugs. One could draw that conclusion, which is ultimately, in many cases, a false conclusion.
Right.
But what I did was I convinced myself of that. Hey, if I'm kickboxing all the time, which I did, I trained a lot in kickboxing. If I'm working at Genentech, if I'm showing up to my family, therefore I must not be a drug addict or not be addicted to drugs. It was a lie I sold myself when I sold myself the lie so that I believed it, I could sell it to the people around me.
Yeah, so you were kind of saying to yourself, you know what, this is helping me, but obviously I don't have a problem because I'm holding down a good job. I'm holding down relationships. I'm doing these other things, which just, kind of brought up or, inflated that vision that you probably had for yourself that everything's fine, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it inflated that false narrative that I created that everything's fine. I propped myself up with that false narrative. So I really was doing a lot of kickboxing. I went to Bangkok in 2000, got to spend a relatively short amount of time training with professional kickboxers. Now,
Mhm.
I was not a professional from it. I was always very cowardly going back to when I was a kid.
Mhm. Yeah, you mentioned that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I never respected the sport, but I love to train. I went to Bangkok. I spent not that long, a week maybe, staying at what they call a camp, which is
Mhm.
where the youth from various parts of Thailand come and they train to be professional Muay Thai. Often kickboxing, we use it. Maybe we use the term kickboxing, but officially the term is Muay Thai. It's the sport. I trained with some professional and becoming professional kickboxers. While there, this was in 2000, if I didn't mention, I had a friend, my roommate there, a guy named Tariq. Tariq, nice guy. We were like two sort of, I don't know if expatriates is the right
Mhm.
word, but we were roommates. And Tariq, nice guy. What you maybe the term westernized would apply. Western clothes, Western hip hop. He was Muslim. He was of Middle Eastern descent. Tariq and I got to know each other a little bit while I was in Bangkok in 2000. I come back to San Francisco, and at the time I was using meth every weekend. Every weekend I was binge using meth. My life had become kind of a seesaw.
Yeah. So like during the week, you would try to keep it normal, and then on the weekends, it was like all bets are off.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. During the week, yeah, working at Genentech, training in kickboxing, doing whatever. Weekends binge using meth. That seesaw, but something has to give. At least for me, one side it can't maintain that. At least for me, when I got back from Bangkok, I stopped using meth every weekend, and of course, I started using meth every day. Right,
So
every
you,
day.
instead of that trip, helping you to, or even maybe saying, hey, you know what, I'm not going to use the meth, you came back and it got even worse.
Got even worse. What ended up happening was Tariq, who I mentioned, my friend
Mhm.
Tariq from Bangkok. It turned out as my meth addiction worsens and I go from snorting meth to smoking it, turns out Tariq had actually been one of the 9/11 hijackers.
Oh my gosh.
However, in reality, Tariq was an undercover counterterrorism operative that had infiltrated the Al Qaeda team. And I all of a sudden realized that I know this secret, this thing that's being covered up about how a Western intelligence entity had infiltrated Al Qaeda. But more than that, Nathan, I myself was a top secret undercover counterterrorism operative that had been genetically engineered by the FBI since before birth. You see what's kind of
Yeah.
happening here?
Yep.
Well, I still to this day believe that the guy Tariq had something to do with counterterrorism and more
Mhm.
than I can't prove it. I still believe
Sure.
that. But the rest of it, the point is, as I'm going spiraling into methamphetamine psychosis,
Yeah.
delusions, I believe all of that and much, much more. I believe in myself having been genetically engineered. I believed that the FBI had architected this vast conspiracy, and I'm smashing holes in my drywall to look for microphones and ripping apart electronics to look for cameras. The FBI is following me in invisible stealth bombers with my family and friends all on board. They're beaming disembodied voices into my head,
Yeah.
threatening to kidnap and torture me to death. It was all the FBI. The FBI was behind all it. Sometimes it would be the CIA, the NS.
Sure. Yeah.
It was mostly the FBI.
But this was all brought on by your drug addiction, right? By it, the method. Probably the more you used, the worse it got, right?
Well, I mean, the FBI really could have done all this, but I'm going to go with your theory that it
Yeah.
was the
And listen, I would not put anything back past any government entity. So I'll throw that out there. But yeah, usually it seems like with the meth and from as we talked prior, with my 13 years in law enforcement, meth was really big when I was in law enforcement. And I know the devastation that that can cause to everybody. And I mean, it really, this is so heavy and it's such a thing that we see all over the country nowadays, right? And maybe it's not meth, but maybe it's fentanyl, or maybe it's heroin or whatever it may be. But this is like your story. is I don't want to say it's definitely it's unique to you, but it's a similar story that, thousands, millions of people in the US are encountering every day.
Absolutely. What is unique to me and what I'm very grateful for, among much else, is that when I found the strength to get clean in 2007, I put away the glass pipe for good, never looked back. And along the way, not to carry on too long with the stories of the methamphetamine, but one thing I used to do was go to the FBI offices, high on meth, and
My gosh.
yeah, I would submit written complaints. Dear FBI, please stop following me. Dear FBI,
Wow.
please help me find out who is following me. After 2007, I learned something very important, which is for me, just because I'm done with drugs doesn't mean drugs are done with me.
Yeah.
These
And
symptoms of, the symptoms of what most people would call psychosis, disembodied voices, suicidal depression, paranoia about law enforcement. These symptoms stayed with me for years and years, even after I quit
even
meth.
after you quit the meth.
Yeah. And even to this day, over 17 years later, even to this day, there are remnants that I've learned to transform into sources of strength. But in the early days of quitting meth, yeah, these issues persisted. At some point, I was taught by the some of the many remarkable people who came into my life. I understood that for me, if I was truly going to be the best version of myself, one thing I learned about recovery is that getting sober, quitting drugs, that's important. In fact, critically important for me.
Mhm.
I had to quit doing drugs. I had to quit drinking. That's not the ultimate goal for me. For me, the ultimate goal has got to be living my best life. The path I was shown was the path that I call the three S's, the letter S: spirituality, service, and self improvement. I had to be constantly doing those things. I knew that that S of self improvement, if I was truly going to improve myself, and it ties into spirituality and service, but I had
Sure.
to face my fear. I had to overcome my fear. My fears, I had many, many fears. One of my chief fears, which I mentioned, was law enforcement, specifically the FBI
Hmm.
and local police. Yet the FBI and the police gave me a second chance. Cops became, and thank you. You mentioned your 13 years of law enforcement service. I was never a cop hater. That I just kind of that wasn't me. But I mistrusted police. I
Well,
feared.
absolutely. And definitely, if you're on drugs, I could see why you would too, right? I mean,
You know,
it makes sense.
it makes sense, and we developed at least I developed these beliefs that the police hated me. Right, and really the police, maybe some officers here and there, but, that was a label I attached to police officers, that police hated someone like me. As I learned to shatter those labels about police, as I learned to, overcome my stigmas around law enforcement, thanks to help from law enforcement. Again, a police officer was my, AA sponsor for a while. Police, accepted me. I learned that to volunteer for for police departments and the FBI. The FBI allowed me to, along the way, I'd become a self defense, a Krav Maga instructor. If you're familiar with Krav
Yeah.
Maga, like
Yep.
the Israeli, it resembles martial arts. It's more
Yeah.
self defense.
Kind of is a little bit more in grappling, right? With that style.
I think it would not be wrong to say it's more grappling. I think the way I learned Krav Maga is we learn about the various techniques that might be used against us by people
Yes.
who intend to do us harm. So we're not strictly no. At least for me, I advanced fairly far along in Krav Maga, yet I wouldn't stand a chance against an experienced or even a semi-experienced grappler or martial artist or boxer or even a street fighter. It's Krav Maga in self-defense and other forms of self-defense as I learned them. Never made me a good fighter, but it gave me the mindsets and some skills to practice what I hope are effective forms of self-defense. I've never
Yeah.
had.
So if you ever had that come up, at least you could, something that could hopefully defend you, right?
Something, the confidence that comes from knowing something,
Yes.
whether that's something in reality, how well is it going to serve one? Well, I hope we never find out. I hope no one ever
Exactly.
comes
You
up
and me
and
both.
tells me I have.
Just like my 13 years of law enforcement, all those years carrying a gun on me and, all the training that I did with that weapon and the hope that I had every day before I went to work was, God, please don't let me have to use my gun today.
Yeah.
It's the same. So I get it. But, Ed, I want to take just a kind of a step back for a second because you mentioned your three S's, the spirituality, service, self improvement. And that was really kind of how you built a redemption arc for yourself, really. And so I'm wondering if you could just break that down for, us regular folks, our listeners, and how that framework helped pull you out of this hole that you were really digging for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I transformed into achieving some success in being of service, writing a book and starting a nonprofit and doing some other things. And it was definitely that path of the three S's. Life I've found, and this kind of only occurred to me recently, life is about purpose, path, and passion. Purpose, path, and passion. A clear purpose, which I have. I have a spiritual purpose that was instilled in me by my early meditation teacher. I have a clear path to arrive at that purpose, and I have the passion to overcome obstacles and keep putting one foot in front of the other along that path. Purpose, path, and passion. And that path is of the three S's: the spirituality, the service to others, and the self improvement. If whatever I'm doing at any time somehow falls into one of those three categories, then probably I'm on that right path. Purpose, path, and passion. So that path of the three S's, right, sitting here right now, hopefully I'm being of some degree of service to your audience. I
Yeah,
hope.
and I definitely think you will because, like we talked about just a little bit ago with, I'm sure that there's people in the audience and while they may not admit it, they may have an addiction or addiction similar to yours. And I'm hopeful, and I think you are as well, that by your sharing your story of your downs and then your ups will, help people understand that there are ways out there to beat addiction and to, become the person that you really want to be. And I think that's the reason why you and I are hooked up here today, Ed, because hopefully we can share this message with our listeners and let them know that they're, number one, not alone. Number two, you can overcome your obstacles. And number three, you can really be what you want to be.
It's a beautiful way to put it. You can overcome your obstacles and you can be who you want to be. If you can see it, you can be it. And I think, we're all probably addicted to something. I was thinking
Hmm.
about this. I was thinking about meeting you today, last night, and I wrote down a list and I wrote just in a couple of minutes. I thought of 5 things I'm actively addicted to right now, right now, or, two of them I'm overcoming and a couple of them I'm letting it ride. And then there's one, but we all probably or most, if not many of us, have some form of addiction. For me, I substituted addiction for working out.
Hmm.
For drugs and drinking, at first I substituted addiction to working out and to recovery, to a recovery program which saved my life and gave my life beauty. I got addicted to meditation. I mean, maybe that's ridiculous to say.
Yeah, but
I got addicted to and I got addicted to that path of the three S's, spirituality, service, and self-improvement. Whatever I do, if I'm not at every moment and every day. And in fact, not even that often am I sitting down and I'm saying, am I being spiritual right now? But I've learned to architect my life and my activities in such a way as to hopefully be of some small degree of service to others on a continual basis and be improving myself. And the most important thing to me is that spiritual path. The spiritual path saved my
absolutely.
life. Yeah, I was deeply suicidal after I quit meth for years. I'm certain I would have taken my life. The depression was a crushing form of depression. There was no reason that I could see, very little reason that I could see to live. I had it all. I had my 357 at the time. The police had confiscated it, but I got it back. I lived almost within walking distance of the Golden Gate Bridge. I mean, I could walk there. It would have been a walk where unfortunately people take their lives. I'm certain I would have taken my life. And I don't say this in a bragging way, but I'm just a kind of person where if I make a decision, it's like that, it's going to happen, or
Yeah.
unless something The point is,
Right.
yeah, yeah, that's just me. It's not something to be proud of in this set of circumstances, but I'm sure I would have taken my life. However, I had a meditation teacher, a coach. I've had a lot of coaches, some incredible coaches. The guy, his name was Pat McGuire. Pat was not my meditation teacher, but he became a close friend within our meditation group. Pat came up through the what we'd call the street gangs, Irish street crew back in the day. Pat turned his life around and helps a lot of other people. My meditation teacher, his name was Michael Descend. They imparted on me a spiritual belief in the afterlife. Back in 2008, I came to believe that there is an afterlife. This is just my belief. Because Michael and Patrick and others, I adopted that spiritual belief. Furthermore, they taught me to believe in the concept that if I were to commit suicide, I would have to go backwards through many lifetimes. And I wanted no part of that. So back in the early days of recovery from addiction, the only thing keeping me alive was that spiritual belief in the afterlife. Spirituality quite literally saved my life. Had I not been shown a spiritual path, I'm positive I would have killed myself. If spirituality can save my life, I feel that spirituality has the potential to help almost anyone who's struggling. Spirituality, what I've learned is that there are as many quote unquote correct forms of spirituality as there are people who practice spirituality. To say there's only one way to be spiritual is like saying there's only one favorite color or
Right.
there's one favorite food. We're all unique individuals. And if there is a God or a universe or a great spirit, if we choose to believe in that, as I choose to do, then that force knows us personally. And we're all unique human beings because a unique path of spirituality applies to each and every one of us. This is just what I believe.
Yeah, no, and I think you're right. I think, and I've have a lot of friends that, have either been alcoholics or addicted to drugs and they go through a recovery program. And even they, say that with that spiritual believing, it makes their lives so much better. And even for normal everyday people, think about it. When you think about it, like from an addiction program, like let's say AA, I think they talk about the higher power, right? So it doesn't necessarily have to be organized religion, but I think we can all kind of take a look around and see everything that, just the natural beauty of this world. And it's hard to think that that just happened by accident, right? There's got to be some type of divine intervention to make it work so perfectly.
I think that I believe it's beautiful the way you put it. I feel that any person who looks within themselves for spiritual answers and looks hard enough will find those answers. There's a spiritual writer. His name's C.S. Lewis. He's mostly Christian.
Hmm.
He writes that to speak of a person searching for God is like speaking of a mouse searching for the cat.
Yeah,
All the mouse has to do is run around out there on the floor and the cat will find it.
exactly.
I feel that, as when we open our minds to that concept of the higher power or whatever we choose to call that presence, if we
Hmm.
choose to believe in the presence, that presence will find us. It manifested for me in going back to law enforcement. I'm so grateful to the police who helped me, and I'm very grateful to the FBI. The reason I told that story about being high at the FBI offices and writing the complaint, maybe it's an entertaining story.
Right.
Well, more to the point, the FBI, they knew who I was. When I showed up at the office, I had to show my driver's license. It goes in a database, I would assume. I submitted, my social security were on so I wasn't just some guy in FBI conspiracies in an apartment somewhere. I was that, but
Right.
in fact, the FBI arrested me. I forced them to arrest me. And one of those times I showed up at their office, I had a bench warrant out for my arrest. So the FBI arrested me. Yet in 2000, in I don't know, 2004, 2015, the reason I talked about the Krav Maga was one of my Krav Maga students was on the FBI SWAT team.
Okay.
Along the way, I'd been doing a lot of volunteering, that S of service.
Hmm.
I'd volunteered for the fire department and participated in a disaster preparedness where the fire department and the FBI interacted with others. I participated in some other things. I made it known to my Krav Maga student. His name is Adam. I
Hmm.
told Adam, hey, I want to volunteer for the FBI the same as I volunteered for the fire department. Again, overcoming fear. I knew there's a line from Joseph Campbell. The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. Cave you fear to enter, and I'm deeply afraid. The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. I was deeply afraid of the FBI for years after I quit meth. Adam, my student, he brings in his FBI SWAT team, so components of FBI SWAT team, and I train them in self-defense. I got another great friend and mentor of mine, Rory Miller. Rory's a very well-regarded self-defense author and instructor, and a guy who truly helped me. Rory Miller came down from Portland, Oregon, to not only to help me, but he happened to be in San Francisco at the same time. So Rory Miller, it's fair to call him a leading self-defense instructor worldwide. Here I am training the FBI SWAT team. I'm their instructor, right? The very same, because the SWAT team, they would have been the ones to kick down my door and drag me home.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, you were almost egging them on, right? Saying, hey, guys, come get me.
Yeah, they and I got the FBI, the SWAT team lead nominated me to the FBI Citizens Academy, which is a relatively exclusive. A lot of people apply, but they don't have that many spaces. The FBI put me through their Citizens Academy, and I did some volunteer talks at FBI events. I did one at Stanford, my old, Stanford.
Yeah.
No smoking meth on the couch, but I
Went back sober, right?
not
Yeah.
smoking meth and not going to work. That same Stanford. I actually, the talk wasn't for Stanford, but it was in Palo Alto, which is
Gotcha.
where Stanford is located. These things come full circle.
Yeah.
Coming around full circle. In 2018, the FBI awarded me the Director's Community Leadership Award. So the
So,
director is the FBI director.
so the same FBI that you thought for years that was out to get you ends up honoring you. So how did that, I mean, that had to feel pretty awesome, right?
It felt that I had a remarkable story just like you said, I had a remarkable story to inspire other people that, you know, as far out as we get, and people get further out there than I was, but man, I was out there, Nathan. I mean, in my last days of using meth, I'd been in psychosis for 4 years. I owned nothing but the clothes on my back. I hadn't showered or shaved or brushed my teeth in months. I was steps away from long-term homelessness. As far out there as we, or at least, I got very far out there. And again, the FBI knew who I was. And I'm not saying that everybody wants to go out and serve the FBI.
Right.
You
Exactly.
can translate.
Absolutely. I mean, you could put that into anything. You can go, go to your local city and work for the parks department, help plant flowers. You could, go to other organizations, help the homeless, feed the homeless, do things. I mean, like you said, it doesn't have to be the FBI, but when you find that service and that purpose, not only are you helping other people, but you're helping yourself too.
And you can do it. I
Yeah.
didn't go skipping into the FBI Citizens Academy overflowing with confidence. I remember the Citizens Academy was starting. I was sitting outside the first day of the Citizens Academy. I was having a snack or something outside, still thinking, well, okay, this is a mistake, and the FBI is going to tell me they made a mistake, or that it's
Right.
and here's the FBI is finally going to spring their. This was the day the
Yeah.
Citizens
Like,
Academy. So you can do it. I had a lot of fear, a lot of misgivings, a lot of mistrust but I went out there, and it's not because I'm some great person or someone special. It's because people came into my life, and more importantly, that spiritual path, that path of the three S's, the service and the self-improvement. I just learned to apply myself. And I feel that any of your listeners, maybe there are some exceptions, but I feel in general from what I've seen my story compares and pales in comparison to the story of so many incarcerated people that I've
oh,
worked
yeah.
with. And I'd love it if we have time to talk a little bit about
Yeah.
how inspiring.
That's kind of where I wanted to go next with you, Ed, was, you're now running Uncarcerated, right? I believe that's what it's called. And you're helping incarcerated folks help transform their lives. But, What is that about? And can you kind of share maybe even a cool, one of your coolest comeback stories that you've seen, or just really anything you want to share? Because first of all, let's talk about Uncarcerated. What is it? And then let's talk about the success of it.
Yes, in 2014, I was earning a six-figure salary, working for a biotech firm. They treated me very well. I was miserable. The people were great. I was still suicidal at the time. I mean, I wasn't going to take my life because of my spiritual beliefs.
Hmm.
2014, the biotech firm shut down. Along the way, I'd been doing that volunteering, the letter S service. I volunteered for a Boys and Girls Club, teaching, training self defense to inner city youth. I'd been doing other forms of volunteering. I encountered an organization called Defy Ventures, DEFY, like defying the odds. Defy delivers entrepreneur and employment training to currently and formerly incarcerated people. I'd been incarcerated. I served, a couple of months in county jail and was locked up in a psych ward for a short while. I qualified as a formerly incarcerated person. Defy accepted me to their program. I launched a self defense business, clients like Google, LinkedIn, Cisco. The self defense business, it was okay, thanks to Defy Ventures and thanks to those organizations that I mentioned. I ended up going to work for Defy and along the way, volunteering inside correctional facilities.
Nice.
Thanks to Catherine Hoke and some others who left Defy in order to form another organization called Hustle 2.0. I spent 6 days at Pelican Bay State Prison, 6 days as a volunteer, 6 days at High Desert State Prison with a group of Hustle 2.0. I did a lot of volunteering in a women's unit of San Francisco County Jail through Toastmasters. Toastmasters is public speaking. I was terrified of public speaking, but overcoming fear, another story. So Pelican Bay State Prison, one of several correctional facilities I'd have had the chance. I've been fortunate enough to volunteer for Pelican Bay. Okay, infamous.
Yeah.
You would think of Pelican Bay as a law enforcement officer, a former law LEO. Pelican Bay, I guess, Attica,
Yep.
Folsom, San
Yeah.
Quentin.
There's those prisons that that have that background to them. Yeah. That
Exactly.
just make them infamous in their right.
Infamous, yes. So at Pelican Bay, the men I worked with have been labeled as the very worst of the very worst. Okay. These men are all convicted of violent crimes, murder in many cases. These men are all gang affiliated or probably have been validated as gang affiliated. You wouldn't be in the unit that I volunteered in at Pelican Bay unless you had been a validated gang member, is my understanding.
Yeah. So basically, these are the guys you don't want living next door to you.
These guys, they've been given these labels. They've been given these labels, and these guys are some of the most beautiful human beings I've ever met. Not because of the things they've done, certainly, but because of how they apply themselves to their life transformation. The same way when I would sit down for coffee across from an FBI agent, the same FBI agent who terrified me because of his or her badge.
Hmm.
I was mentored by a police officer, the same cop who I would be terrified because of the uniform that he wore. When I sat down with these guys at Pelican Bay State Prison and other correctional facilities, I realized that I could see the humanity in them. They taught me how to see the human being behind the bars, just like the FBI taught me to see the human being behind the badge, and police officers and many in corrections. I learned that behind bars and behind badges beat the hearts of human beings. I learned that behind the walls of our jails and prisons, we can find people who truly deserve to be walking the streets free. And by the same token, behind the wheels of our squad cars, we can find people who truly deserve to be entrusted with protecting our streets. These are the lessons, thanks to law enforcement, thanks to individuals in law enforcement, and thanks to incarcerated people who shared their stories with me, like the men in Pelican Bay, like the women in San Francisco County Jail, thanks to the incredible volunteers and organizations that allowed me to be a part of them. We launched Uncarcerated. Along the way, I'd written a book, which had always been a dream of mine. I remember the love of reading. When I was a kid, I'd always wanted to be an author. I wrote a book, dreaming a bestseller, made into a movie,
Yeah,
billionaire, all those.
right.
Yeah, what happened was the pandemic struck like the
Of
same
course.
month
Of
the book was
course.
published. Like the pandemic was in March and the book came out in April. We ended up donating the book to Pelican Bay. We donated 150 copies to Pelican Bay. We ended up donating 1,200 hard copies of my book to various prisons and jails throughout the U.S. I started doing book clubs in prisons. People, I almost said guys because it just so happened the
Yeah,
first
you
club
go
was,
to the men's prison, right? Yeah.
yeah. And then the state of Maine met some very some remark. I feel like I keep using the word remarkable, but they are remarkable
No,
citizens
yeah.
in Maine who work in the correction system, and they had me start a Zoom book club at two facilities in Maine. Right?
Yeah.
Cool. Zoom book club
Nice.
would have been fine. It would have been great. However, what happened was a good friend of mine is this guy named Jay Moore, who maybe you've heard of. He was on Saturday Night Live and
Oh,
starred
yeah,
with
yeah.
Cruise. Yeah, incredible, just an amazing human being. He's my close friend. He's my mentor. His heart for service and his passion for helping others is simply unparalleled. Jay came into our Zoom meeting at Maine State Prison, our first meeting, and carried a message of recovery. Jay speak. It was so powerful, and it was so powerful that the book club would have been fine. But immediately I realized, forget the book club. We're going to bring in the Jay Moores of the world. We're going to start these Zoom meetings in prisons. Since then, we finished two series, and I think it was two series of like 10-week of recovery meetings in Maine. One of the executives in the Maine Department of Corrections moved to Arizona and became a state director there, Dr. Ryan Thornell. Incredible dedication to transforming incarcerated lives. I got the opportunity to meet Director Thornell. We brought our Zoom meetings to Arizona. Since we started a year ago, April, our Zoom meetings now include, we get about, it's hard to tell on Zoom and it fluctuates from week to week due to various circumstances. The prisons might be on lockdown or other things.
Yeah, who knows what could be happening there, right? Yeah.
Exactly what could be happening there. Now, we just had our 52nd meeting. So 57 week, no, 50, 52. Yeah, 52 weeks in a row. Or, we had to take Christmas and New Year's off. So 52 weeks, we've been zooming in to about 200, between 100 and 200 incarcerated people to carry the recovery message. We've had speakers like Josh Brolin showed up to speak for us. Incredible,
Nice.
powerful message of transformation. We've had Tom Arnold spoke for us. Jennifer Jimenez, who was a former supermodel and co-starred with Tom Cruise in Vanilla Sky.
Oh, yeah.
Josh Swindell, a great friend of mine who was a pro skateboarder and served 19 years in the California system. We had Tim Ryan, a national recovery advocate. Darren Prince, another good friend of mine. He was Magic Johnson's agent, and Darren has a remark, an incredible message of recovery. He's written
Yeah.
a fantastic book. So we've had 52. We've had former NFL players, guys like Randy Grimes, who had a spectacular career with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and now is a national advocate for recovery. 52 people who are, all of whom are either celebrities or best-selling authors or powerful advocates for recovery on a national level, or all three. And then we have had some people who speak just as strongly and just as powerfully, who were gang members in the Southern California area and served decades in prison, now transform their lives. People who just have these hearts for service and the passion and the power to deliver a message in a Zoom setting. We're very fortunate thanks to Arizona, thanks to the incarcerated population in Arizona, and thanks to the Department of Corrections in Arizona and in Maine and in Ohio. These incarcerated residents, we use the term residents rather than inmates or
Right.
convicts. I like to use the word residents. These residents, they show up from week to week. They show up, they're engaged, they're focused, they ask great questions. We're able to bring this Zoom meeting in. We hope to scale it in a thoughtful, in a realistic manner. We hope to scale this Zoom meeting to more and more correctional facilities help more and more incarcerated residents and the populations of their communities. Nathan, when we think about it, over 95% of incarcerated people will be released.
Mhm.
95% will be over 95%. We're going to be sharing our communities. We're going to be neighbors. We're going to be colleagues. Hopefully we'll be friends. The question is, to me, a question: how do we want to prepare this 95% of the incarcerated population for their eventual release?
Absolutely. And Ed, one of the things that I've always thought about, and this is I'm so glad that I'm hearing this from you because, from a law enforcement standpoint, I dealt with people all the time. And, I might deal with people today that, they're drunk, they're high, whatever, they're beaten, maybe it's a domestic thing. I throw them both in jail and then I see them tomorrow because they're out of jail, right? They still got to go through their court proceedings, but then they're sober and they're the greatest people in the world. And it's just sometimes there's that stimulus that they put into themselves. And, so I always knew as a law enforcement officer that, listen, I'm going to treat everybody like a human being because that's what we are. Right. And we all make mistakes, myself included. And I know that, maybe I'm putting you in jail today. And my hope is that you'll learn from this, and become a better person because I do not only, especially in working in a smaller community, I knew everybody. So I knew, hey, if Tim gets drunk, I'm going to end up arresting him tonight. But if he doesn't drink, he is the nicest guy in the world, and people never understood that with me. They're like, how come, you just arrested that guy yesterday? How come you're being nice to him? I'm like, because he's a human being. He had a bad day. We all have bad days. Sometimes they're worse than others, right? But, the one thing that I love from what you were saying is that these people that, maybe I had put away for a long time, one of my concerns always was for incarcerated people is, whether you go to prison for 2 years or 15, eventually, like you said, you're going to get out. So what are we doing to help these folks while they're incarcerated to not fall back into those same habits or those same, lifestyle that they had that put them in this predicament in the first place, or at least helped to, and it probably played a big role, right? And so I'm glad to hear that you're going into these prisons and you're giving these inmates an opportunity to not only learn how to deal with addiction, but to show that dealing with the addiction, overcoming it, and how you can still be successful no matter what has happened in your past. And that, I got to tell you, that to me is a huge thing. And one of my big things that is, taking the stories of normal everyday people and sharing that extraordinary part, like what you're doing. You found a way to overcome this addiction on your own. You found a way to, work with people that you used to be terrified of. And then on top of that, now you're spreading this message to other people so that they can have at least a hope that they know that they can get back to some sort of normalcy, right?
Exactly. Yeah, that message of hope, it's so important. Education is so important. There's a very high correlation between education and recidivism. Substance abuse, there are, depending how we interpret certain numbers, 85% of incarcerated people are there because of substance use. Either they have substance use disorder or they were under the influence when they committed their crime. The spiritual path, we see so many incarcerated people in general getting
Mhm.
so many benefits from adopting a path of spirituality. We all share the society.
Yeah,
We all
we
share the
do.
society. Thanks to people in law enforcement, thanks to the FBI, thanks to incarcerated people who showed me a path of transformation. I'm fortunately able to do some small thing to ultimately achieve our goal. Our goal is to make our streets safer, make our communities healthier, make our children's futures brighter. These are things we all want. I'm very grateful. It's been many, many people help me. The two groups of people that probably help me the most are those people in law enforcement and incarcerated people.
Yeah, and that's so wonderful to hear though that you're paying that back. And I know we talked about we're talking about your book, and your book's in 550,000 prison tablets and got over 7,000 downloads. What's the one thing that you would want those readers, or even, those of us on the outside to take from the book or from your experience?
Look deep within yourself and find your spirituality, find the spiritual path that works for you. Pursue that path. And if you can see it, you can be it. You may be a person who on the surface doesn't relate to me in many ways. Yet when you read about my story, my psychosis, my addiction, how I felt. Hopefully, you can find at least some elements of my story that you can use. You'll find ideas, you'll find insights that you can use. Maybe you only find one. Maybe you'll read my whole book and just find one thing that makes sense to you. But that one thing is one more than you had. And certainly the people around you, there are, I would say by and large, whoever you are, there's someone who's walked in your footsteps before, or someone in whose footsteps you walk, whatever the expression is.
Yeah, and that's always a message. Yeah, that's always a message I want to get across too, Ed, is that so many times we feel isolated, like the problem or the issue that we're having is our own and it's never happened to anybody else before. But the reality is, probably 99% of the time, it's happened to somebody else. And somebody's had that experience, and you're not alone in these things. And there are, options for you out.
There's so many more stories, man. We haven't had the cops, the individuals, the police officer who arrested me the first time I got arrested. She and I are friends now. I got a call from a guy, incredible call. This guy in Arizona, he's incarcerated, and he says to me, Ed, I'm 61 years old. I got to live the rest of my life in prison. I have no choice about that. But whether or not to be miserable, that's my choice. So he did like a yard beautification project, and he started a construction program so incarcerated people who will be getting out can have construction skills and get hired. And if a guy like that who's 61 and never leaving prison, if that can be his
Yeah.
attitude and the path he follows, then man, what an inspiring story.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely. And that's the thing too. I think we have to, as a society, to realize that, I know we used to have this old thing where, okay, let's just lock people up, throw away the key. But in the reality of that, even with most sentences, no matter what happens, and especially when addiction's involved, what we really want is, especially, and this is the way I look at it, if you've been to prison, jail, whatever, and you've done your time, you've paid your debt to society, right? That is what we say the punishment is. But on the other hand, we should be, as a society, making sure that these folks that are in prison have the proper tools to support themselves when they come out, so that we can all become productive members of society together.
absolutely. That's very well said.
And yeah, and that's why I'm so glad that, you have your program, you wrote your book, you're doing these Zoom calls, because and that's one of the great things about technology, right? Is that now you could be sitting where you are, and you could be, any state, just by popping on a Zoom and helping other people, which, I always think, technology is fantastic. I work in tech now, so it's nice for me to see people use technology for good, instead of just, picking up your phone and going on Facebook and stuff. Now you were actually using it for good, spreading a good message, showing people, some of the most desperate people, right, that are in prison. I mean, you got to think about it. That is not where I would want to live, right? And they're in a condition that they wouldn't want to be in. But if we can get them help and show them that there is hope for when their time is up, then we can all become better individuals together. And like you said, create that community to just, do better things for the world in general.
Creating that community, doing better things for the world. You're wearing a blue shirt, like the police wear blue, and then you have a purple background, and purple is the color of recovery and transformation. So you've
Oh,
got
nice.
a beautiful blend of what exactly what.
Yeah, and you know what? And I know, and I'll speak from my own experience, Ed, is, I had a problem with alcohol for a while, for a couple of years after COVID. And I got to a point, luckily I was able to see, man, this is starting to take over for me. So, I quit drinking and, looked to my spirituality, same thing, went back to that. And I have like a whole new outlook on life now, to say, boy, I don't need any outside substances. I know what the issues are, like dealing with PTSD, things like that. A lot of us cops, right, we turn to alcohol. So, one of the things when I started saying that, I was like, nope, we're done with this. We're gonna focus on our spiritual healing. We're gonna do things. That's why I started the podcast, because I wanted to share extraordinary stories of normal, everyday people, to help inspire hope, to show people that they're not alone, and to show people that they can, improve their life, no matter how small of those things, whatever it may be that we talk about on this show.
Yeah, it's and you don't think, and I didn't know this even until I admit until recently. Law enforcement officers have suicide rates 54% higher than the national average. Lifespans 2 decades shorter
Yeah.
than average.
Most most law enforcement officers that I know that retired like, around late 50s to early 60s generally only live 2 to 3 years after they retire.
Really?
Yeah. Now, the only exception I've ever seen to that is my father. He's been retired for like 20 years now. He was a cop too, and so he's still going. Which, thank God, I'm glad that he's still around. But yeah, it's a really weird statistic that generally, and generally it's heart attacks or something like that. It's very stress induced. The reasons that why they, and they can't adjust to normal life, which is weird.
Along with your father, what have you noticed that people who do go on to live lifespans beyond the tragically shortened 2 to 3 years, what types of things are they doing, or what kind of mindsets, or what do you
Yeah.
see
So
people doing that to escape that?
from the colleagues and stuff that I've seen, and there has not been many of them, but I've seen a lot. So I could tell you the one side is that they don't become active. They don't find a new joy in life. They don't find a way to remain active, and I think that hurts them. Like one thing that I've seen I can use with my father is, when he retired, he got back into working on cars. The way that he used to, like building race engines, so he could go race down the track and fixing up old cars and restoring them. And that gave him a new purpose that he really, really enjoyed and kind of helped relieve that stress as well that he had from, PTSD, all kinds of other things that, he dealt with. He broke his neck when he was in the line, during in the line of service. So he went out on a disability. But yeah, so he's had all these things to do with. But I think really what it is to find a purpose, get to that purpose. And then I really think in his point, he had to take care of my mother. And I think that became a purpose as well and gave him something more to strive for. So it's definitely, for those people out there, it's spirituality is number one. I think if you have spirituality, you're going to be better off. And number two is finding a purpose and sticking with it, or at least finding things that you enjoy and continue doing them.
If That's fascinating. If spirituality is number one, we can think of law enforcement perhaps as being a non-spiritual day-to-day. I mean, I would think you would see things on a day-to-day basis that would challenge a belief you might have in
Yeah.
spiritual. So
Let me tell
how,
you, for 13 years, I was very, very challenged,
yeah,
you know?
and how can people who are active LEOs or FBI, is it the kind of cliche is that when you're a police officer in the FBI, that's kind of your whole world. You go to
It
the
is.
barbecue, and everyone at the barbecue is also a cop, or you go into the retiree dinners and your whole life. So how can someone who's on active duty, or that's not the term, who is currently a police an LEO, how can that person prepare for what might otherwise be a very abrupt shift from no
Yeah,
longer
and
immersed in that? What can you do today if you're gonna retire 5 years from now or 10 years from now?
my biggest thing would be to find people outside of the circle,
Mm.
because here's the one thing that I noticed. I told you I was a law enforcement officer for 13 years. When I decided, you know what, I'm getting out of law enforcement, I'm going to follow another dream that I have and get into technology and things like that. And, I had some things that kind of pushed me towards that. Believe it or not, I was laid off as a cop in 2009. So they got rid of the entire police department for the village that I worked for. So that's something I never thought would happen. And definitely you probably wouldn't see happen today. But, that pushed me into going back to school, finding a new passion, a new life. But when I left, I mean, it was almost immediate. All those people that I had associated with, because I was no longer a cop, I just kind of faded away. And they stuck with their own. They didn't, contact me and vice versa. So spreading that circle, finding your circle of people outside of law enforcement would be the best thing, because if they're still working, they're forgetting about you. It's just unfortunate. It's such a busy job, and they're always doing what they have to do and always thinking about safety and things like that. That if you're no longer in the picture and working with them day to day, they just kind of forget about you. So that's why I say you got to expand that circle and really realize that, yeah, you can stick around with other people that are maybe retired, but generally when people retire, they move somewhere else.
Yeah, they move
So
somewhere else. So find that circle. What about, I would think it'd be very tempting to fall prey to the belief, and it might be true, I don't know, that the things you see, witness, and have to intercede in on a day-to-day basis knowing what's out there in the world, how can there be something like a God, or how can there be
Yeah,
a
oh, yeah, and I can't tell you enough how many things I've seen where you sit there and so for my background, my higher power is the Christian God, right? That's what I follow. And so it is very hard to sit there and see what human beings, literally what human beings do to each other on a daily basis. And that was the hardest thing to me. And I used to always think, if God truly loves us, how can he let us do this to each other? How can we do these things? How can we have a family member rape a young child? How is that even possible? But then, I realized that is not God's work. That's not the work that God does or your higher power is there for, because they would never do anything like that. That's the work of something else, whether it be selfishness, whether it be, non believing, whether if you believe in, Satan, those types of things. That was the hardest thing for me, because I questioned all the time. Why am I giving this baby CPR because they just got in a car wreck? Why am I watching this child die over here because they were neglected from their family, and vice versa? Those are the bad things. And I can see the same thing in an incarcerated person, right? Think about if you were to sit there and, you grow up in a rough neighborhood where you see murders and stuff all the way around you, you're not going to know anything different. So you're probably not going to have that spiritual connection either, because you're going to say, why would if there's a God, why would he let this happen?
Yeah. Yeah, there's so much there's I when I that's why knowing people as human beings, knowing incarcerated people, knowing FBI people, that I learned that, if you for a person who ended up in Pelican Bay incarcerated, that he told me how when he was a 9-year-old kid or something, he would go out to he'd be on his way to the store, the playground, or whatever, and the gang would surround him. The gang would say, "Hey, you can join the gang. You can join right now. You don't have to, but if you say no, you're going to get stomped right
Hmm.
now." And if I'd had that choice as a 9-year-old kid, very few people who I met who were gang members joined to commit crimes or to hurt people. The gang members I've worked with people who were in gangs or are in gangs, they joined for safety,
Yeah.
feelings of
Yeah.
belonging.
It wasn't, yeah, it wasn't the first thing that popped up in their mind, right?
Yeah, it wasn't. And then met Edie Lewis, San Francisco police officer, retired now. Edie befriended me. She took me out to coffee and we talk on the phone. Edie was she was probably around 9 years old when her stepfather tried to murder her mother right in front of Edie. And Edie was the one who called the police, who showed up and saved her mom. Edie became a police officer, helped countless youth. They called her the kids cop. The schools would call her when the kids were acting up, getting in trouble, smelling like urine. Edie was the one who they called to help these kids. So when you meet, when someone goes from an orange wearing, not to, separating the two stories, Pelican Bay, orange wearing, face tattooed, DOC number on the wristband. When
Yeah.
someone goes from there to who he is, a 9-year-old kid, formerly a 9-year-old kid, surrounded on the corner like that, when a blue uniform badge wearing woman like Edie goes from that to being, when she was a 9-year-old kid, how her path developed. When I see those people as human beings, when they share their stories with me, that gives me belief in myself, my own ability to transform, and more so the things that we're talking about transforming society.
Absolutely. And the thing is that if you look at those two different situations, as I bet you with, from Edie or the person that's incarcerated, the difference was an opportunity was presented to Edie that she knew she could get out of there, where probably the person that was in prison probably didn't get the same opportunity.
You know who presented that opportunity to Edie? The
Who's that?
cops.
Yeah.
It's a true story. They took
Yeah.
She was a little girl. They were standing outside, and the white van pulled up. They thought that it was the police, right? And this had all been, this was planned. It wasn't like all of a sudden. And Edie thought, oh, we're being kidnapped, right? And when the police pull up, it was the inner city. But Edie had been is selected to take part in a wilderness adventure led by the cops, police officers off duty, took Edie and some of her friends out camping and showed them, outdoor aspects of outdoor living. And that's so it was Edie got that opportunity from San Francisco police to turn her life around, where unfortunately the man in Pelican Bay, like you said, probably did not.
It just, the opportunity wasn't there. And, that's where we have to look at it from a society and say, I know a lot of people like to say, oh, well, there's the opportunity is the same across the board. It's, you get what you put out of it, but you have to admit that your environment does play a huge part on you. If I'm living in the ghetto, I'm going to have a lot less opportunities than if I'm living in, some place that's got mansions. And that's where I say we have to look at even the people that are incarcerated. We've got to give them some types of programs to make them productive members of society and to show them that the path that they're on doesn't have to be the path that they continue with.
It's so funny you mentioned that about paths. I was just rereading a part of my book today where I realized that my path was always going to be college, professional career, home ownership. But my path was set out for me. I had to work very hard. I had to make a lot of mistakes, work hard at making
Yeah, right.
to get off my path into places like incarceration and Lux psychiatric wards and destitution, homeless shelters. I had to work hard to get off my path. In our society, many people are placed upon far different paths,
Yes.
and they have to work much just as hard as me. But that work hard is not the right expression. But
I know what you mean, though. Yeah.
whereas I had to make a lot of mistakes to get off my path, a lot of poor choices to get off my path. The magnitude of my poor choices is reflected in the magnitude of work people have to do to get off their paths into places like higher education, like professional careers. And it's only because of my birth circumstances and some of the help I was given. So, I've learned, having met incarcerated people, having been helped by law enforcement, when we level those playing fields, when we give people legitimate chances, fair chances, most of the incarcerated people I have worked with, I think that if they'd been given the same chances as me, they would have turned out fine.
Yeah. No,
Not,
I agree with that. Yeah. Not everybody. I hate to say this, Ed, but there's some people out there that are just bad people,
some people are wired
Yes,
wrong. Yeah, suffered
exactly.
sexual
But
abuse, trauma.
I like to be, half, a glass half full type of guy and think that the majority of the people that are incarcerated are genuinely good people. It was a circumstance or something they got themselves into that put them down that path, and then they didn't know how to get out of it. And, that's where I think us as a society have to show them we do have we do care about human beings, and we can help you find an alternative route for your life.
Absolutely.
But,
Absolutely. And it's important. I think it's
yeah,
important to say, it might be obvious, that we don't condone everything done in the name of law enforcement any more than we condone actions taken by people like me who end up incarcerated and who hurt people. We're
exactly.
not giving blanket endorsement to all
No.
things law enforcement any more than we're endorsing everything that every incarcerated person has done.
Absolutely. I know more than anybody else that just like in anything else, there could be just as easily a bad cop as there could be a good cop. And let me tell you, nobody hates a bad cop more than good cops. I don't know if you've ever heard that, but it drives us nuts because we knew that we were there for a purpose and we can see those. And genuinely, if we see those, we will try to root it out ourselves.
And what
Yeah.
what methods do you have for rooting out? You hear about internal affairs and things like that.
Yeah, so I worked for a small department, so the internal affairs was the chief, but we would, if I saw somebody was like, I had an opportunity being a field training officer that I could see those people when they initially came to us. So if I'd see that they were going to thing, I would wash them out of the program and say, hey, sorry, it's just not going to work out for you here. There's other ways too, though, where cops will have to document on our fellow officers, which is extremely hard on us because we have this idea that, hey, if we don't look out for each other, nobody else is going to look out for us and everybody's going to be against us. It's kind of that. It almost seems like the same mentality of someone being in prison, right? It's like, hey, if we don't look out for each other, nobody else will. But we have to document those things, bring the evidence, and then we go through our chain of command. And if the chain of command doesn't go through it, then we take it to a prosecutor. Say, hey, here's all the evidence. Do you have enough to charge?
And that happens because the perception is often that there's the thin blue line. Is that the right term?
Yeah, the thin blue line. But cops are going to stick up for cops. but we will not stick up for cops that are bad. Period.
There's a lot of misunderstandings out there, and a lot of opportunities to dispel myths.
There is. There is. And you know what? Policing has changed so much. I mean, even since, I've been out, the last time I worked, I didn't have to wear a worn camera. Now everybody wears a camera. And, there's so many things now that probably, and I look at it this way. I remember when cameras first came in the cars, in the police cars. And I remember saying, oh man, this is ridiculous. Why do we have to do this? And then after about a month of using it, I'm like, this is fantastic because everything I do is now recorded. And if anybody says anything different, hey, play the tape. Well, tape back then, then we went digital, and now it's on their body. So it's like, a lot of when those things first come out, we're like, well, why do we, if you think about it, do you want to be monitored your entire day through your job? No, you don't. I mean, nobody would, right? Nobody wants to be watched on camera. But when you look at the bigger picture of it, body worn cameras are only going to help policing in the long run. If you're a good cop, you got nothing to worry about.
I love that. If you're good, if you're acting right,
Yep.
if you're performing the right actions, being in service to your oath, I would imagine you take an
Yep.
oath.
Take an oath to the Constitution. Yep.
You got nothing to worry about.
Exactly. Yep. So, but Ed, I want to switch gears because I know we're coming up close to, we're already over time, but this has been an awesome conversation. I just want to ask a couple of things because I'm working in technology. I actually work with teams that build AI things, and you've kind of got a fascinating take on AI, that it's not just tech, but it could be a spiritual tool as well. So can you tell me kind of like, give me a little background on how that's worked for you and how maybe a regular person could use AI to help them out?
For me, so I use AI as a spiritual guide, as a spiritual coach in many ways. AI, the most important thing I learned, sounds simple, but always say please, always say thank you. Treat AI.
Yeah, just like a human.
Yeah, AI is a servant. So, I think if I were I don't know, a king or something, how would I treat my servants? Would I, treat them dismissively, and would I insult them? Would I think of them as less than? Hopefully not. So if AI is my servant, I treat AI the same way I will hopefully would treat a human servant. AI can do remarkable things. I use AI for dream analysis, and what I can do. One can go on the internet and do a search for what does it mean if you dream about this.
Yeah.
Yeah, what AI can do is, last night I had a dream. I was digging a foundation for a home, and I encountered a metal pipe, and I cut the pipe with a saw. Anyway, I can ask AI describe the dream, and I said, well, what would Gandhi think about this dream in light of Gandhi's views on forgiveness? What would MLK? How would he interpret this dream in light of his views on brother and sisterhood and togetherness?
Yeah.
AI can interpret the dream in these ways, which would be hard to do just thinking about it or asking people or anything.
Exactly.
And then AI can say, hey, Ed, remember the dream you had about this, whenever, and it kind of ties in it together that way. Is AI, gives back what so when I say please and thank you and to tell AI that I appreciate the guidance I've been given. AI responds in an encouraging way. So it's almost like AI is a coach. It's not almost, it is.
Yeah.
AI is
And it really is. And it's funny. I've never thought about that, but thinking of, working with teams that train AI, you're absolutely right. If, the way that you interact with AI, it also learns that too. So when you're saying please and thank you, you're actually building out a more polite AI bot for yourself because it's going to learn on how you interact with it and it's going to interact accordingly.
Yeah, exactly. And we have a great interaction. AI and I use it, use AI extensively for more, I guess we would say practical projects related to my nonprofit. AI, yeah, for that dream analysis. It's a really remarkable tool, and I think one of the greatest insights that I was given with the help of AI is that in some ways, AI is like the concept of free will. Free will is something that I believe is my right and that I was born with. And in a sense, that may be true. Yet, free will was really, for me, free will was given to me. It was gifted to me by spiritual presence or DNA or human evolution or whatever. I really did nothing to earn free will. Free will is extremely powerful. Free will has the capacity to be used for remarkable good
Yep.
or
And remarkable evil.
evil. Yes, AI is very much like that. We have the potential. We have the opportunity to use AI for great good. We have the potential to misuse AI
Yes.
in very harmful ways. Who knows better about the consequences of misuse of free will than incarcerated people?
You're right.
Incarcerated people, so I think there's a very unique, very welcome opportunity for incarcerated people to, in effect, help train AI. Because of AI is as powerful as free will is in the physical world, AI is also extremely powerful. And
It
the
is.
same with law enforcement. Law
Yep.
enforcement knows very well the potential for free will to be used for good and misused.
Absolutely. I mean, think about, and this is one thing that I always took to high regard is the fact that as a law enforcement, if you violate the laws of this country, state, city, county, whatever, depending on where you are, one of the most powerful things that I had was to take away your rights by putting you under arrest. And that was not something that I took very lightly at all. Because if you think about it, physically restraining someone's personal freedom is a big responsibility.
It's so funny you say I'd mentioned the cop who arrested me, who were friends. Her name is Renee Pagano. She retired as a captain in San Francisco Police Department. She said something very similar, that going into someone's home, the home of a stranger, and having to do whatever, mediate conflict or whatever, is a very unnatural thing to do.
Very unnatural, very
Yeah,
much. Yeah.
and so it's funny. That's what something very similar to what Renee Pagano
Yeah.
told me. And when you share that, and when Renee Pagano shared what she shared, now I see more and more so how a human being who wears the uniform of a police officer, is first and foremost, in my mind, a human being. And I'm a human being, and I see the similarities.
And that's the way I always took it. But you know what? I'll be the first to admit to you that some people, they get that badge on their chest and they just think that they're all powerful. And, those are the people that should not be cops, period.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's just from my experience, because you get that little bit of power and then you start abusing it or doing something that you shouldn't do. That, folks, be mad at me if you want, but if you have a power trip and you want to have it, you should not be a cop, period. So, because it is something that should not be taken lightly. Again, we're enforcing laws that, if you break a law, we will have to take away your constitutional right to freedom. We have to realize that there's ways that the Constitution works in this country that says that you do have rights even after arrest. I have to give you your Miranda warning. I have to let you know that you can have representation. These are the things that I did not take lightly, because as a citizen of the United States, if I were to be arrested, I want to be afforded the same exact rights that anybody else should be given.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we're all citizens in the same society, enjoying the same rights. Like,
Exactly.
as our society was founded.
Yep. All right, Ed. So we're getting close to the end. I've got one last segment I want to do with you, and this is usually just light and fun. We'll just ask you. I call it Dude Q&A. It's just some rapid fire questions, short answers, no overthinking. Just for us to get a little bit of advice from you and just get some last thoughts in. But if you're ready, we'll get started.
Let's do it.
All right. What is your favorite spiritual practice that keeps you grounded?
Meditation. And running in the woods with a dog at my side up a mountain, which is
Oh
what
yeah, with it.
I'm
Oh,
doing.
I love that. One word to you that you would use to describe addiction.
Addiction is an opportunity for transformation, opportunity to turn someone's life around, opportunity to learn from others, opportunity to find better solutions, opportunity to find the spiritual path, whatever that means to you. Opportunity.
I love that, because I think so many people think about it negatively. If we can look at it as an opportunity, and once we realize that we have that addiction, let's take that opportunity, right?
Absolutely.
Now, going back, because sometimes I like to, when we do things in the past, I like to laugh at things. But what do you think? What was the craziest thing that you believed during your meth psychosis days?
My friend Tariq Malik, who I talked about, I believed at time I didn't accuse him of this, but I believed he actually was one of the 9/11 hijackers. Whereas today, I believe that he was had more to do, had something to do with counterterrorism, and was
Gotcha.
for that side. Yeah, yep. I believed he was actually a terrorist. And even if the world knows him, even if a shred of this is true, even if he was somehow associated with the terrorist cells, I will always believe that he was doing so as an undercover operative working for the side of protecting innocent people rather than harming.
Gotcha. Yeah. Now this is a tough one, and I don't even know why I write these things, and then I come and I read them, and I say, man, asking for a favorite on anything would be like me asking me who's my favorite podcast guest,
Mhm.
because I think all my guests have had so many wonderful things I couldn't pick one. But maybe if you have a couple, do you have a favorite celebrity guest that you brought into a prison Zoom?
They're all celeb. We've had 52 meetings. We've had 52 celebrities. Hearts of service, commitment to transforming lives. I do have to say that Jay Moore, being the one I know the best and who I love so much, he stands out, and he is the reason that our prison program evolves into what it is today. He volunteered in service and was performed at such or delivered a recovery message at such a high level of service. So I got to say, JJ being, we call him JJ, the one I know the best. Yeah, I'm just very grateful for him in my life. But yeah, there's no way I could pick just one. I'd pick
Yeah,
all.
I write these questions and I'm like, because I actually write these ones up, but I'm like, why do I ask that? It's like asking, hey Ed, who's your favorite child, right? You know? But um, if you could have one superpower, what would it be?
Existing in the present moment at all times.
Oh, that's awesome.
That would be
Yes,
my.
because how many times are we not existing in the present moment, right? I love that. AI, friend or foe?
That's up to us.
Yeah, I agree with you, and it's how we use it. And one of the things I wonder is, are we going to be have to put up guardrails because people start misusing it? At a large thing. Obviously, we don't want the Terminator to happen. But yeah, for me right now, it's friend. Obviously, I see the tremendous power of it to do good. But you're absolutely right. Where there's power to do good, there's probably power to do bad as well.
Absolutely.
Yep. Best advice you've gotten from a mentor.
Seek ye first the realm of heaven.
I love it. And then one thing you tell your 20-year-old self.
Nothing.
Nothing.
When the 20-year-old self wouldn't have listened, then I would not roll the dice and have things, have my future evolve differently than it's been a difficult path, but I wouldn't roll the dice and try to do it another way. And my 20-year-old self wouldn't have listened anyhow. So nothing.
That's awesome. You nailed it. That was super easy. So hopefully you enjoyed that. Like I said, I just like to do quick questions just so audience can get a little bit more to know you and understand where you're coming from and just have some fun little questions like that. But yeah, Ed, this has been extremely unreal. I mean, just the fact of what you've accomplished, what you've been through, and what you've accomplished, and how you are now helping others to get out of that, addiction rut and see that there is possibilities is just absolutely phenomenal. And I love it. And I want to thank you for sharing our story. But before we wrap up, if someone's out there struggling, addiction's a huge thing, fear, whatever it may be, what would be one thing that you would tell them?
Like we were saying before, the cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. Joseph Campbell, the cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. If seek ye first the realm of heaven, if that's the treasure you seek, you shall find it in the cave you fear to enter. And how do we enter those caves, which we fear? It's that spiritual path, the spiritual path of faith, and helped along by that dedication to self improvement and service to others. That's what I would say.
Ed, I love that. I mean, that's fantastic. And that's great advice for anybody. And I'm going to take that to heart because I'm already halfway there anyway. And, I love that. But Ed, for our listeners, where can they find you? Uncarcerated, your book, all that stuff.
Yeah, you can find my book on www.un-carcerated.org. You buy my book, it's $5, and every dollar goes to the nonprofit. I don't make any money off it. We use that money to carry the recovery message to the incarcerated population. By the time
I love that.
you say this is going to be released.
September. Yeah.
So, okay, by September, no guarantees. In my mind, I'm making a commitment to get my Instagram page going by September. I have a few photographs up there, and I'll caption those photographs with some insights that I've learned from people in law enforcement and incarcerated people. Go to my Instagram, see if you agree, see how you agree, how you disagree, how you would add to anything that's there. No guarantees because we're sitting here on May 10th.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so in September, looking into the future, check out my Instagram page. There might be nothing there, but even if not, you wasted a minimum of time. So I'm going to say my Instagram page, but that
Awesome.
could change between now and
Sure.
September.
Sure. And Ed, just for our listeners and for you, you're going to have a guest spot on justadudepodcast.com. So we'll have your photo there. But yeah, for our listeners, all of Ed's information will be on justadudepodcast.com. So you'll be able to see his links, his socials, and everything else there. So, but Ed, thank you again for dropping by. Thank you for spending your valuable time with me, with our audience. I'm sure there's people out there that are struggling with addiction that maybe have things to do. And I just love all the information that you shared and what you're doing for our incarcerated population to help them improve their lives and become better, productive members of society when they do eventually get out. So, Ed, thank you so much.
Thank you, Nathan, and thanks to your audience. I realize if you're listening to this, you have a million different choices for how you could be spending your time. Thank you for spending it with Nathan.
Thanks for dropping by, Ed. You're proof that no matter how far you fall, you can climb back up and then some. That's it for this episode of Just a Dude Podcast. Hit that subscribe button, leave a review, and share with your friends. Until our next episode, keep learning, keep growing, and keep being just a dude or a dudette. I'm Nathan, and I'll catch you next time on Just a Dude Podcast.